Today we're going to focus on the different types of evidence that you can find at a crime scene. Before we begin, I'm going to reiterate that Dr. Edmond Locard is the father of forensics. So you're going to hear about him a lot. He established the first forensics lab in France in the early 1900s, and he's known for the Locard's exchange principle, which is basically saying that when a person comes into contact with an object, a cross-transfer of physical evidence can occur, right? That makes sense. Like if I have peanut butter on my hands and I run into somebody, my peanut butter hands are gonna get on someone else and now they have peanut butter on them, right? That just makes sense. But this was sort of like a big deal in the world of forensics because this basically stated that with evidence that the two people were in contact, or the two materials were in contact with each other. That means that this evidence is now a silent witness to the criminal act. The intensity, duration, and nature of the entities in contact determine the extent of the transfer, right? If you have a towel that's really soaked in blood, it has a higher intensity than one that only has a few, blood spatters on it, right? So forensics is built upon this principle that cross transfers create evidence and evidence solves crimes. The chain of custody is sort of just like you're going to hear it in a few of the other case studies that we're going to be talking about, but a chain of custody is the documentation of the evidence. So this is when, if I'm at a crime scene and I notice that there is a fingerprint, I'm going to document that I saw the fingerprint, I have taken it in as a piece of evidence, and when I hand that off to the correct person, they will also sign the chain of custody. It's absolutely incredibly important that this chain of custody is not broken, because if it is, it's basically not usable evidence anymore. So as long as the chain of custody is intact and it's showing the correct chain of people that you're supposed to be going through, this evidence is ironclad, right? It shows that the evidence hasn't been tampered with and can absolutely be used in the court of law. But if the chain of custody is not maintained, it will be challenged in court and likely be thrown out so that you can't use that evidence to convict someone of doing something bad. So there's two kind of like umbrella terms for evidence, and it's important to be able to classify this evidence. It's either direct or circumstantial. And from that, it can be broken down even further, but let's just get into kind of the big umbrella terms. Direct evidence is firsthand observations. So eyewitness accounts, police dashboard, video and voice recording, signed ransom notes, all of the things that you can tell without a doubt firsthand. There's no mystery involved, right? A video surveillance, you can't make that up. It's a recording. It is what it is, right? Whereas on the flip side of that, circumstantial evidence is indirect evidence. So you can use it to imply something, but you can't directly prove it. And this goes in for prints like bite marks, tire prints, fingerprints, DNA, ballistic evidence, fibers, and hair. So even with this, and I know what you're thinking, DNA, you can absolutely prove that it's somebody. But what this is sort of saying is that if let's say there was a murder in my classroom, I'm sure that my fingerprints and my DNA is all over this classroom just from me being here every day, but that doesn't necessarily prove that I was involved with anything. It's implied that I probably did something because my fingerprints and DNA is everywhere, but it cannot be directly proven. So circumstantial evidence, like I said, can be further classified. So then there's the physical circumstantial evidence or biological. And I think that this just sort of makes sense, right? Physical is like prints, bullets, weapons, anything that's, physical. And biological, go figure, is anything that comes from the body, right? DNA, hair, natural fibers that would have DNA in, like cotton, something like that. And then the last way that you can classify evidence is class versus individual. So this is sort of like a slightly outside of the types of evidence, but this is how you would classify evidence in a different way. So a type of class evidence would be where you could narrow it down to a group of people. So like shoe prints, right? Like right now I'm wearing Toms. I'm not the only person in the world that owns Toms. So if they got my shoe print, you could narrow it down to people that have a size 7 Tom shoe in their closet, but that doesn't narrow it down just to me. It's a group of people. Same with blood type. You can narrow it down to a group, but not an individual. And hair without the follicle is the defining feature that would link you to an actual person, but if you just had like a piece of hair that fell out, again, you could link it to a brunette or a blonde, but you wouldn't be able to get the individual. So anything that's a little bit more broad would be class, and anything that's individual would be anything that could legitimately get you to that one singular person. So DNA, hair with the follicle, fingerprints. Okay, so these are just various ways that we classify evidence, and we're going to focus on different case studies to look at how, like, what evidence was collected and what that type of evidence is and what it meant to the case itself.